People by the people. For the culture.
Peace, Jumbo. Welcome to the Vital Hoops podcast, right here on Black Power Media. My name is Fernando Cardenas, aka International XB. I am your host. This is episode number 65. Before we get into this episode, please make sure you go to blackpowermedia.org and you check out AFRO magazine. The first issue is already out and the second one is coming real soon. You don't want to miss that. And make sure you check out all these great shows we got going on right here on Black Power Media. Decolonizing Feminism and Captive Maternal Agency. We got Arm the Masses with Professor Griff. We got, of course, RSTV with Kalanji. And don't forget to catch the Rise Up International Morning Show from Tuesday to Friday, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Shout out to everybody at Black Power Media, including those behind the scenes who we don't necessarily see through the camera. Big up to y'all. And shout out to everybody watching, listening. Please make sure you share this episode of the Vital Hoops podcast because this episode is about to be real special. We have an amazing guest, and our conversation will be mainly centered around African identity in Spanish-speaking countries. Our guest is a Black Puerto Rican woman born in the Bronx, New York City. She's an organizer, a producer, an independent journalist, and a scholar activist. She ran for vice president of the United States with the Green Party alongside Cynthia McKinney in 2008. Our guest is frequently sought out for her insights on Afro-Latinx identity, Black liberation movement, police violence, colonialism in Puerto Rico, hip-hop feminism, third-party politics, and much more. Our guest is Rosa Clemente. Rosa Clemente, peace and welcome to the Vital Hoops podcast. How you doing?
Good, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
No problem. I appreciate you taking the time. It means a lot. You know, I've been, as an Afro-Cuban hip-hop artist and, a Pan-Africanist, I've been following your work over the years. And, I really salute you for what you do and for what you've been doing for our people in general.
Thank you.
So yeah, no doubt. So it's really dope to have you here on the Vital Hoops podcast. Appreciate it. So let's jump right into it. Let's talk a little bit about you, growing up in the Bronx, right? Because, we understand that specifically in the United States, sometimes people have trouble understanding, between race, ethnicity, and nationality, right? There's like a bit of a mixed up there. So if you could please talk to me about when you began understanding what it meant for you to be a Black Puerto Rican as opposed to just a Puerto Rican.
Yeah, that came when I went and became an undergraduate student here in Albany, New York. I live here as well now, at the University of Albany. But I'm born and raised a little less than half of my life in the Bronx. And then my dad has always had his own businesses. And my mom, I think, was very aware because it was the 70s. We had just also had, in 77 to this day, the biggest blackout. And I remember watching, I remember all of that, sitting out in the middle of the night in the Bronx, no lights for 2 days, people going back, it was chaos, of course. And then a little bit later on, she got a house in Westchester County. So if anybody here is from New York, Westchester County is the suburbs of New York City. So it's my house and where I grew up with my family as well in this little village, legit, it's a village to this day, which means it's less than 2,000 people. So she moved there for the schools and in all intents and purposes, going to school where I went to school, Alexander Hamilton High School, everybody was middle class. Like the whole village, everybody like truly knew each other. But also we were the first Latinos to move into Elmsford, New York. Now it's predominantly more Latinos. So like, I graduated with 37 people, and most of us are still alive and kind of keep contact. But so I'm living like in this like utopic suburban well, everybody knows everybody, you go to school, there's no police, there's no checking your bags, and also it was in the 80s. So just in general, that whole time period for those of us growing up in the 80s was like malls, school, and this thing called rap kind of thing. But yeah, so when my mom moved us there, I understood the older I got that my trajectory in life had changed, because every weekend we would go back to the Bronx. And it's not like it was a 35-minute ride, right? To see my cousins. And so as my cousins and I were growing up, I knew something was different because I was encouraged to go to college. I had a counselor. I was involved in all the groups. But I didn't know anything about race either. Like, I don't quite remember when I learned that Puerto Ricans are citizens of the United States. So I have this like idyllic kind of utopian.
Okay.
I always tell people I never saw one police officer in Elmsford, New York, never in my life. Like to this day, I still,
Wow.
even though the police are there. But it's a long thing, because the thing I remember the most is that my cousins weren't being encouraged to go to college. My cousins were told like racist stereotypes that all Puerto Rican women do is get pregnant and they're on welfare. All the men are drug users or in jail. They're violent, and that obviously was not my experience at all with anybody in my family. But I began to see like, oh shit, like none of them are going to college because they're going into school violence that hate them, So when I went to college, then I was like, oh, okay. Because I always just went as a Puerto Rican or Boricua. That was it. And my parents said this, Puerto Rico all the time. I have all relationships with my abuelo and abuelita and all of the people in my family. Like, I have a huge family. My mom had 15 brothers and sisters. So right on my mom's side, I got like 103 cousins. And most of us grew up in this working class, middle class thing. But when I got to campus, I just didn't know. Like, people would be like, you're Hispanic? I'm like, no, I'm Puerto Rican. And then people would be like, you might be of African descent. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that language. So that first year at school was just like a big wake up, like, oh my God, you have been dealing like this idealistic,
right,
childhood growing up. And now you don't know anything about yourself. Like, people were like, go to the Black student meeting. I'm like, but I'm not Black. And they were like, okay, yeah, go, because you are. And then one of my friends was like, you need to take an intro to Puerto Rican studies. And I'm like, why? I'm Puerto Rican. And he was like, well, did you know this and why you're citizens, why your people can't vote? I was like, I don't know none of that shit. Right. And it's crazy because the 70s and 80s in New York City was just Caribbean people. And I think people underestimate that, particularly at that time of hip hop, the majority of people from the Bronx were Puerto Ricans and Jamaicans, which is why Boricuas are co-creators of the culture of hip hop. So basically, that's once I got up there and once I finished the first year, then I joined all the student groups I could. But ASUBA, the Albany State University Black Alliance, was very well known in New York State. There's other campuses that have the same name and they use a different wording for the acronym. But the more I went to Black studies and I took Intro to Puerto Rican Studies, Intro to Feminist Studies, I had a professor basically say, you should be a major in Africana Studies, not political education. And she's like, because right now you're beginning a process of breaking the binary around African American, white American people in this country. And you know who you are racially, ethnically, people look up to you, you're a great leader, you need to be in Black studies. And that's what I did. And then I became the Albany State University Black Alliance president. And from there it was on, like, and it's been on since that whole time.
No doubt.
I'm 30 years out of graduating from SUNY Albany, so.
Okay. So let me ask you about this. I want to talk a little bit about, African identity, in Latin American countries. I'm currently living in France, right? And I grew up in Havana in Cuba, but I did live in the US for about 10 years almost. And there's always that thing where, like you said, they say, sometimes they tell you, you're Spanish, right? I would always reject that, like I would always tell people like, if I'm Spanish, that means you're English. That's what I said. Like, are you English?
Yeah.
Do you identify as English? How am I Spanish? I speak Spanish. People who colonized my ancestors were Spanish, but I'm not Spanish. So there's that going on. And like I said, a lot of mixed up between ethnicity, race, and all of that. But I find that, in South America, in Spanish-speaking countries, I believe for the most part, there is a lack of, African identity amongst our brothers and sisters. I feel like that's something that's real down there because there is a lot of, you tell me what you think, but I think that a lot of it has to do with a lot of these countries pushing nationalism. And for example, I know that in Cuba, it's not seen very well to identify as Black before Cuban. You know what I mean? If you identify, no, I'm Black, I'm Afrodescendiente, before I'm Cuban, it doesn't fly very well. They take it as, no, we're all Cubans here, you know what I'm saying? And that's how we have to go. What has your experience been as far as all of that?
Well, first, geopolitically, Puerto Ricans don't fit in Latin America because we're colonized, right? So if you even take a Latin American studies class to this day, they're not going to include Puerto Ricans. And very rarely would they include Dominicans, maybe a little bit more with Cuba because people have more of also an understanding of this island that went a completely different route and was not colonized by the United States. Not saying that in Cuba, if you're Black, you're good. No, that's not true because it's the same in Puerto Rico, but it's the same conversation. People like, when you're in Puerto Rico, you're Puerto Rican. This other stuff, what people would say, this other things, at the end, national statehood or national, a feeling of like an island nation is important. So when I think of Latin America, I think of like Central and South America, right?
Like
And we can go
Venezuela.
all, we can go all the way to Brazil, that obviously for decades has had Black Brazilians challenging the multiracial democracy that's what Brazil is. Obviously now with De Silva as the president and Bolsonaro gone, you're going to see even more and more work around African descendant people. And most people don't know that outside of the continent of Africa, the most African descendant people are in Brazil.
In Brazil, absolutely.
Right? Lo mismo with all of Latin America, where people will say who they are based on where they geographically live.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. The Caribbean to me is different in this sense. First, we're geographically next to each other. There's been nationalist movements all throughout the Caribbean that included obviously Puerto Rico as well. I mean, if you look back at the fight to be independent in Puerto Rico, there was a lot of support. And one of the kind of architects of what would be the independentista movement, Clermont Betances, had very deep ties with folks in Cuba, but also Albizu Campos, the kind of number one nationalist leader that people know, had made a deal with the Irish Republican Army when he was getting his law degree out of Harvard, and that it ended up the IRA armed the nationalist movement in Puerto Rico. So like when people say Latin America is lazy, it has not, like even Latin, what is Latin?
Absolutely.
The Catholic Church, is that a language?
Right.
And then it can go into the bigger questions, what's Latino, then what's Latinx, right? And what I see, one of the things that when we identify nationally, people don't want to talk about race.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk about gender. They don't want to talk about a separate, a different sexuality, like even to this day. But I do think it's very important that people understand that Puerto Rico has been having like an independent movement and we've been crushed, where our leaders have been imprisoned and killed and taken as political prisoners for the last 127 years that we've been a colony of the United States. So lastly, what I'll tell everybody, especially when I'm talking to students, like, think of Puerto Ricans as African American people. These African indigenous descended people, right? We have citizenship for what and for who? Mm-hmm. Not African Americans and not Puerto Ricans in that sense within a United States politic, right? So that's how I tell people, like, and again, growing up in New York City, we didn't have these things. So it's like, oh, you're this, we're not rolling. It was Caribbean people. Yeah. And then luckily having always be able to go back to Puerto Rico when I want to. You know, I can go back and forth. I don't need a passport. Those are definitely privileges, but, you know, then also we've seen what this country does with slavery and that. But that's why I've also known that the African-American Puerto Rican communities in general work with each other and have always been together, especially in New York City, basically from the 50s to now. But hard, like, that bond nobody else has in the world except us and African American people living in the belly of the beast.
Yeah, 100%. See, the reason I ask that is also because what I've witnessed over the years where I've been able to go, I have actually never been to Puerto Rico, but the countries I've been able to travel to and, you know, the people I've been able to talk to, what I see that always reoccurs is that no matter where we're at, African people are at the bottom of society, right? Absolutely. Darker people are at the bottom. And so I'm sure it makes a lot of people reject their blackness. That's where the anti-Africanness comes from, you know, because it shows in society, including in the Caribbean, at least I know in Cuba and countries like Venezuela, etc. People would rather call themselves Indio, for example, you know, or native before they're known as African. And I see the same thing in Northern Africa, where people who have black ancestry will rather call themselves Arabic than African than black, right? So this constant anti-Africanness that we see coming up everywhere is deep in South America or Latin America or the Caribbean, right? And so that brings us to the question of, like you said, Latino, you know, the Latino identity. What does being Latino mean? Where does that word come from? I'm gonna be honest. Personally, I don't identify as Latino, and I can't, because I feel like for us, I feel like it's really identifying with the oppressor. And I feel like it is something that divides us deeply. Latino, I feel like it divides us as people of African descent, because where we are, you know, we speak the colonizer's language, right? So whether that's English, French, Spanish, it doesn't matter, right? And so we're identifying by the language we speak pretty much, and by we could say certain traditions, but all of these traditions are very similar to also other brothers and sisters that don't necessarily speak Spanish, right? So it's not really tradition, I would say. I would say it's more so the language. We're identifying by the language, and it's not even our language. It's the language of the oppressor. So I have a problem with that personally, so I would love to know what you think about that.
No, I agree with you. Like, you know, I've seen the language change since I was politicized and came into a space. Like, I've been saying I'm a Black Puerto Rican for 2 decades. For me, you know, it's not. But first, I want people to think about it, like, because I do feel, especially at this moment, that now this word anti-Black is being pushed on, quote, Latinx people in this country. Like, we're the only anti-Black people. No, the world's anti-Black. Let's just start with that, right? Like, so then break it down. You know, and I know why that happens politically, why it is important for white supremacy to have us use these things. I began to understand, right? Because in the late 80s or even in the 90s when I was in college, people were still using the word Hispanic. But once I became politicized, I would be like, so we're not descendants of Spain. I actually went to Spain. So I went to Spain, Portugal, and Morocco literally in high school. That's why it's like my high school could be a private school, because my school trip was to Spain, Portugal, and Morocco, right? And when I got to Spain and my other people were like, Rosa, you're Spanish. I'm like, it's not the same. But I was in high school. But I just knew, I was like, this ain't my people. That's what Spanish looks. I don't fucking know. Like, I grew up bilingual, like, but what I did learn, especially as an undergrad and when I went to get my master's, is Hispanic means a descendant of Spain. And what I always say in all my talks is I do not wrap my arms around the people that raped my great great grandmother. Right? Like, no. But I know that growing up, the Spanish thing, like you hear it all through hip hop. It wasn't like denying Puerto Ricans or Dominicans. It was just like that's the language that the system caught up. It's like y'all are different. And also when you talk about Latin America that you asked earlier, obviously, yes, there's always this national embrace, you know, but it's also like for at least the last 2 decades, there has been a shift in how people even name themselves. But because I understand what you're saying, it's super personal to me. So I'll tell people, listen, you can introduce me, just know I do not use the word Latina to refer to me. I hardly use Afro-Latina, and now I'm saying Black. I think there's been 2 things that have happened for the 2 decades after I wrote a very strong piece called Who is Black. There's a younger generation now that is like unapologetic, like, oh shit, I'm Negro and that's beautiful. I'm Moreno, that's beautiful. I'm African descent. Like, it's there.
Yeah.
But when I think about the terminologies, what you're saying is if the consciousness is at a different level right now, it doesn't matter if we're not self-determining and what power looks like. I love going on Instagram and seeing young people be like, yo, so I went home for Thanksgiving. I told my family this. I taught students about their Africanness. Luckily, I spent a year in LA where I had to also understand the politics with African American and Chicano folks. But all that being said is this. I believe the newer generation is at least questioning it. When I was talking about it, and luckily I was politicized by the Malcolm X grassroots movement, because to this day, I don't really get invited to do anything Latino, anything, what that means, like Latino classes, Latino this, and I'll be like, students will hit me up, I'm like, yeah, they're not gonna approve me, they don't like that, because as I was coming into my African descendant space, but also Blackness, my own people have been the ones like, shut that shit down. Why can't you just say that? And I was like, you know why I can't say that? Why can't you stop using the word latinidad? And then we might have a conversation. When are we going to know that Latinx, A, E, what the fuck does that mean? It's not a Latinated race and a gender. It's not like it's, and even to this, I get so frustrated. But something you just said, and this is what I've been writing a lot more about. As our lands were colonized, except for Cuba, then our work is to decolonize the mind that Frantz Fanon talked about, right? How do we decolonize our mind, our food? What does that look like? But even at this moment, let's say like me and you on a panel together, you're gonna see people be like, interesting, what are they gonna say? And what would we say? We're Pan-African. You don't even know what that means.
Right.
You know, Cuba helped Puerto Rico as much as it could, but unfortunately we were colonized, and Cuba was, and then they had a revolution. So I think all the things about language for me is probably the most important thing, but I also definitely believe in what you said. Again, telling people like, you can put that on a flyer, but when I come up there, I'm gonna be like, that's not who I am. Rosa Clemente, a Black Puerto Rican, born in the Bronx when hip hop was created. That's how I identify.
No doubt.
But I don't, I want to say this, I don't ever erase people who are beginning to have an understanding but are not there yet, right?
Yeah, of course.
Because part of organizing is like, you do the work, you don't know when these other people are going to catch up, but they eventually will catch up. And so for me, again, like right before COVID, but definitely during COVID, I've had the most engagement around people, young people just feel like, but I'm a little light skinned. I don't think I'm black. I'm like, no, you are. Like, I'm fucking light skinned.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? But because in this country, again, we are never in the space of us as Cubanos, Panamanian, Puerto Ricans, invited to anything that talks about race and their city and nationality. So why would the people who are learning, they're not going to see me or you?
Mm.
They're going to go a different route because they do not see themselves represented in these spaces. And they're going to make a space. Or people like us will, like, you'll see the light bulb go off and they're like, okay, I got it. I know what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. You know, I was mentioning in Spanish-speaking countries, the amount of, you know, anti-Blackness and anti-Africanness. I'm sure there's still these terms in Puerto Rico. You know, in Cuba, you still hear terms like, you know, pelo malo, you know, speaking about, yeah, pelo malo, pelo bueno. And there's things like, you know, adelantar la raza. I don't know if you ever heard.
Right, yeah.
That's crazy, right? And these are things that, you know, people still speak about, you know, on the regular, like it's something normal. They're talking about like advancing the race. Basically, the lighter you are,
Yeah.
the you know, and it comes from obviously, you know, within society, but it shows that it's still truth within society, that, you know, the lighter you are, the more opportunity you're gonna get, you know, the better your life will probably be. So a lot of people, but like you said, it is true that there is a movement of youth that is kind of, you know, appropriating their Blackness and their Africanness. I have witnessed that as well, and it's a beautiful thing. But you mentioned the Malcolm X grassroots. I want to specifically get into the Malcolm X grassroots going to Cuba for Black August with certain artists, and I don't know if were you a part of that?
I was not a part of the Cuba trip, but yeah,
Okay.
let's talk about that. But listen, this is two things, all right? So
Yeah.
the fellow Malo Bueno, Richie Perez, may he rest in freedom, one of the founders of the Young Lords Collective, Young Lords Party, but also like I was so blessed to have him as a mentor and so many of my comrades. Thing Richie would always say, we have to, again, that's where I got my idea of if we decolonize the lands, what does it matter if we don't decolonize the minds? It's because
Yes.
Richie, every time he would be like, we have to root out this. But also the Young Lords and the Black Panther Party, and then Fred Hampton and the like all this incredible revolutionary history just here. Richie was always really good at being like, we gotta like take it out, right? But also what this part of what we're talking about, lightness or darkness, is colorism.
Mm-hmm.
And my dear friend, like, I don't know if you've seen her book, One Drop, but Dr. Yaba Blay, she's the expert on colorism.
Okay.
Right? Because she talks about a time me and her were on a panel, and then I said, well, you know, that somebody introduced me as Afro-Latina, and I said, I get it. I'm not like really, I'm not mad, but I just need you to know I'm a Black Puerto Rican woman. And afterwards, Yava was like, yeah, I don't think you're Black. And I was like, oh, let's have that conversation. And we did. And we're good. Like, you know, it's just like, oh, but she also wrote about her book, how uncomfortable I made her feel, kind of thing. So when you're talking about the colorism thing, it goes back to what you were saying about Latin America. Yeah. Like, Latin America more has solidarity with working and poor people than a politic of Africanness or Blackness, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I agree with that 100%. And so it leaves certain things out that are important as far as, you know, decolonizing the mind, you know, as far as, you know, anti-Africanness. Like I said, it leaves certain things out. It tends to do that. And you see it throughout, like we said, you know, it's something that happens throughout the world, but we want to focus a little bit in South America and, you know, the Caribbean. So I have this other show called Habana Negra, right, which is in Spanish with a couple of my comrades. And so what we do is that we speak about, you know, all types of issues, but with a Pan-Africanist perspective in Spanish, right? And I feel like that's missing a lot. There's not a lot of Pan-Africanism that's in Spanish. There's not a lot of Pan-African information, including books. Even when we talk about books, there's little compared to, you know, other languages. So we feel like it's important for us to get that out there. And so recently, as a guest, we had on my brother Sekou from the Cuban hip hop group Anónimo Consejo, right? And Sekou is one of the legendary Cuban MCs, and he's an activist as well in the community. He lives in Cuba right now, and so we spoke about a few things. We started out speaking about Black August and the roots of Black August, and then we got into a little bit into what happens when the Malcolm X grassroots went to Cuba for the Black August, festivals, etc. But also, I come from the Cuban hip hop, underground Cuban hip hop tradition, and one of our main influence, I don't know if you know, but the godmother of Cuban hip hop was Nahanda Abiodun, right?
Yes.
Nahanda used to have like political education classes. At the time,
Yeah.
I was a little bit younger, and I actually wasn't in Cuba at the time. I was in the States. I was living in the States, but a lot of my peers and older MCs, they were having classes with her, political education and everything.
Yeah, and just so you know, specifically the reason that we called it Black August is because specifically a brother named Kofi DeVarvo and Lumumba Vandeli, when they went out there and they had a visit with Nahanda, and Nahanda said to them, "You got this culture, use it to free political prisoners." So, so that first trip, I was in part of Malcolm X grassroots movement at that point. It was literally where I was that year moving to Brooklyn. Yeah. And I had already known Lumumba Vandeli, one of the co-founders, and Monifa before there was even an MXGM. I had known Lumumba. Lumumba and Dr. Vega are even the reason that I'm here now. Where, so yeah, around Cuba, yes, that's how it went down.
Yeah. And so it's interesting that you say that, because our brother Sekou, he actually did mention Lumumba. He spoke about Lumumba.
Yeah.
And so he spoke about how, with Nahanda, it was so freeing. He spoke about like how important it was to be able
and
to.
Common was there too. And
he came through.
Common was there.
Black Star went out.
There.
Yeah. They all went out.
That was the way we also did the Black August in 2001 when we were in South Africa for the United Nations conference against xenophobia. We brought Black August to where we had all the artists, including J. Rue and including Boots Riley. But we went to that conference, and then when the conference was ending, one of my other comrades, we were like going all through with the brothers. It was our brothers. So I'm gonna be like, it was no women. I'm not gonna lie. It was all the men kind of thing. And so for me, like even going to South Africa was like very humbling, because there was a moment where the young people were like going off on all the rappers, like Sick and Black Thought.
I saw that. You know what? I saw that in the documentary.
Well, yeah, I'm in the tent, and then Dream Hampton's next to me. And then Dream is like, "Girl, I'm not going to say no shit, go." And then I was like, "Wait, I'm Black." And they're like, "No, bitch, you mad light." And then I was like, my sister was like, "No, look at my tattoo. Africa, look." And they were like, "And what?" I was like, and only Black Thought, he's the one that brought it back together.
Black Thought?
When all chaos was happening, he's like, "Listen, I just want to listen. I just want to listen."
That's deep. Yeah. That's yeah, no doubt.
Because one of my girls always is like, "Yo, Rosa, once we start saying we're Black, then we get super Black. Like, everything is like," and I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, no, we gotta like even interrogate the Black politic that they're talking about." I'm like, "No, they're Black." She's like, "Everybody's gonna say that shit. Not everybody's Black. Like, we know we're Black." I was like, "All right, cool."
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. That's an interesting conversation. We have that whole thing between.
Yeah, you should definitely interview Lumumba.
There is. Oh, I would love to. But there's this whole thing between Africans from the diaspora, and Africans on the continent. And then Africans on the continent sometimes saying that we're not necessarily Africans and all of that. So, we go through all of that, but that once again is also meant to divide us and et cetera.
No, you're right about that. But I will say this, going to that conference, it made me be like, okay, I know what I'm going to do. If all these Latino, whatever fucking groups hate me, I don't give a fuck. Like, I went to the Reparations Council, and then I was on the Afro-Latinx African Descendant Council. And I didn't talk at that council because then I'm seeing all these incredible African descendants for Colombia, Venezuela, like they're there, and they're like, fuck this, we need reparations. And then it's like, oh, and then all the stuff with Palestine, we're there with Black August. So it was like, for me, those 13 days were just like, all that information could be like 10 years, and I just got it, and I came back with it. I think something you said earlier is like, every word is used except Black or African. And I think that's also my critique on the same young people that I'm like, go do you. This is my critique. These conversations cannot be about hair, food, or a drum. Okay, because that's how the shit goes down. You go, you see Afro Latinos, and what it is, a drummer and then some food. I'm like, no, where's the politics? Where's the Pan-Africanism? Like, even using Pan-Africanism, this younger generation is not even gonna know what the fuck this is about. Even though we're not doing the work, but that's the whole thing. Like, it seeks to separate us. Who benefits for us separating ourselves, which at the end is white supremacy that Fernando talked about. And white supremacy, the first thing they do is divide and conquer. So now, if you're in the United States within like when Fred Hampton was born and Puerto Rican nationalism, and then you're at this 2001 U conference and you're being challenged in the best way, it's also like going to that conference gave me the fortitude to not always be so myopic about the United States. We're all over the world, and there's just things you don't understand. So once I felt that, I said, my job is to go and write notes, and that's it. And that's what I did. But again, that was 23 years ago. People looking at us, I was like, but we're better. And you're like, better for what and for who? We're not fucking better. What are y'all talking about? Kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. See, that's what you just said. When we talk about nationalism in these countries, a lot of times that's what it is. Like, they'll be like, they won't mention Black, they won't mention African. They'll be like, we're all the same. They'll focus on class, which is cool. But then what happens is that, like I said, our people at the bottom, and lighter skinned people are doing better.
At the top.
That's consistent throughout, you know what I'm saying? Like, you'll see that in a country like Brazil, which is, like you said, it's the country outside of Africa with the most Africans. It's actually the second country in the world with the most Africans next to Nigeria, right?
Yes, yeah.
And you will see all the people doing great, white Brazilians, descendant of the Portuguese, and you will see the favelas full of African people, right? So that's how it is. And then when you mention race and everything, it's taboo. No, we're all Brazilians and this and that. Brazil, one flag. But then we know who's suffering, right? We see that consistently throughout. But to get back to my brother Sekou and Habana Negra, what I was saying, like how important Nahanda Biodun was, and rest in power to her, but how important she was to our movement, because Sekou would speak about how great it was to be able to understand how the other people of African descent in other countries were living and how certain things were extremely relatable, even like the United States and Cuba. You know what I'm saying? There's certain experiences that, Black people go through that are extremely relatable throughout, you know what I'm saying, throughout the diaspora, no matter where we are. And so he was speaking about that on Habana Negra, and he was speaking about the growth and all of that. And so I'm saying all of this to say, in Cuban hip hop, we've lost a little bit. At the same time, like you said, we're seeing somewhat of a youth that has certain consciousness when it comes to Blackness, but we've also lost a lot of this radicalness.
Politics.
Yeah, definitely, and
That's what I'm saying, like,
and Black politics specifically, because these older MCs that taught me within Cuban hip hop, they were about their Blackness, they were about, they were speaking about, our African ancestors, even from Cuba, you know what I'm saying, the Mambises that fought, how most of them were Africans. They were speaking about people like Quintín Bandera. They were speaking about El Partido Independiente de Color, all these things that are extremely important that today's youth has kind of lost in their new hip hop dialogue.
And also,
aesthetic.
we're not going to get it back. Like, I think
Yeah.
after the millennial generation, it's a wrap. Like,
Mm.
it's a wrap. Because having and knowing children in this space, including my daughter,
Mm-hmm.
if you can't sell it in 60 seconds, it's over. Right? As my sister taught me, who does communication strategy, like, if you can't say your message in 60 seconds, but also something that Rainbow Coalition also was like, your job is to keep decolonizing the mind. But where we're at, that's my whole critique. Why would you even invite me to a panel about my hair? I don't give a fuck. Like, I don't have time for this bullshit. I'm talking about what Robin Kelly talks about, a Black radical tradition that us as Boricuas and Cubans have been part of. Because as the Harlem Renaissance is rising, and then you have someone like Arturo Schomburg going around the world collecting anything around Blackness. Arturo Schomburg that was kicked out as a citizen of Puerto Rico for talking about independistas. But if people look at New York, what they called them was Puerto Rican and Cuban social clubs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people will always ask me, like, why does the Cuban flag look exactly like? I said it's not exactly, but what it was is Jamon Betances and all her people were like, Cuba and Puerto Rico are going to be free. Cuba was good, and then these motherfuckers came to us and colonized us, right? Like, even that question I'll get from young people, like, oh shit. But I only learned that because I went to college. It wasn't like I was learning that with my own family. So I don't do those events anymore. I'm like, it's just like even with hip hop. No, I'm not doing the feminist thing anymore where you have four of the women talking about how all you men left us out as we're at the event. I'm like, yeah, I'm done with that shit. I want to be part of it. Probably I'm getting older and I'm just like, my time is precious. But the fact that we're even talking about this today, it in this context of the United States of America, what's about to go down, I think is critically important because I do feel there are many people in our respective communities that are thinking how we're thinking, but they're also dealing again with decolonizing their minds.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. I want to keep going with hip hop. To me, hip hop politicized me. It gave me identity. It gave me purpose. It helped me, find who I was and what it's like to be African. Just a lot of everything. It gave me, centered me, culture, everything. But I want to speak about this, misogyny, within hip hop.
Oh, no, I want to talk about that too, because I'm going to tell you a story.
Yeah. Misogyny is something that I've always said, we have to address this, right? We have to speak about this. But some people say that, it's in the culture, right? You let me know what you think, but that's how I see it. I say misogyny is not a part of the culture. It's part of society. It's part of society, and we're in this society, right? So then it obviously, this is what happens. It comes into it, but it's not part of our culture. That's not what, you know what I'm saying? But it's something that we have to address because we're part of this society and it obviously touches us. So yeah, well, how do you feel about that?
I just feel like patriarchy is a system that affects all of us, and that whole thing with the culture. I do think that a younger generation is like, yeah, we're not, it can't be part of the culture. We're gonna erase that. But I think within hip hop politics, there for almost a decade has been conversations around misogyny and patriarchy in hip hop, right?
Yeah.
And I know personally, like people like Joan Morgan who wrote Chicken Heads Come to Roost, people like Dream Hampton that is part of the Malcolm X Suits movement, finally exposed R. Kelly for everything. And then there's even obviously a contradiction because I don't want more prisons, but I also believe these motherfuckers need to be locked down because they're predators, right? So there's a lot of that in itself. So which I also think is very dope that we do that we're arrest him, but then what? And then do this, but then what? But I mean, we're going on post 50 years of hip hop. Pretty
Yeah.
much, I turned down every panel because all they wanted to deal with was the whole woman question, which I'm ready to talk about. But I'm also like, at this point, you dudes are like 55 years old. Why am I having this conversation with you?
Absolutely.
I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look at the history of hip hop through Black August, through a different lens, right? All this shit, I'm over it. And that's why this 50 years, you don't even see that many women on a lot of things because we dealt with this for 2 decades. And now everything we knew to be true around major sexual assaults, major patriarchy, misogyny is now there. Like knowing Tarana Burke and her Me Too movement, right? Like I always say, Me Too skipped hip hop. And I don't got time to go back. I just don't have time for it. Wow. So like pretty much all of these, I've been like, nah. I was like, now put me on a panel to talk about Puerto Rican independentistas, then I'm there.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be part of your one panel dealing with misogyny while the rest of the conference is not dealing with patriarchy or misogyny. Like, I'm not going to be your mascot.
I feel you.
And that's what happened. And I have no qualms about it, you know, because we've been in this for a long, long time. And we're just realizing that in this demographic, nothing is going to change. So what's the point?
Yeah. I mean, we saw what happened with Diddy. You know, I wasn't surprised, you know, with somebody like Diddy. But
yeah,
you know,
and also like there was a lot of things in 30 years. That's what I'm talking about. Me being in a lot of these spaces and having these conversations, having conversations with the women he assaulted, who all they ask is for privacy. It's like, I got you. I will never, ever like mention this. And also as a journalist, I'm always like on the record or off. They were like off. I was like, okay. And it's fucked up because everybody around him knew also what he was doing, which makes them complicit.
Yeah.
And they destroyed a lot of women. They just did, you know?
Yeah, without a doubt. And then we have someone like, you know, Bambaataa, which is, you know.
Well, I mean, that's hard too.
That's tough. That's tough, yeah.
No, I was close to him, but when everything went down, me and one of the dopest people in hip hop, DJ Cutting Candy, we talked. I'm like, we have to say something because me and her were coming from a place like all our interactions with him were beautiful, right? Like, in what world would I have ever been like, oh my God, you're a child predator,
right? But
also, when the accusations came out, it was me and Cutting Candy. No one else was signed to it in the hip hop world. And was like, fuck, put it out. Just like I did my shit with Rick Ross, just fucking put it out there. But the fact that he is facing a federal trial with child trafficking and the boys who are now men have came forward, it was also like, fuck it. I mean, I didn't think a day I needed to. I was like, what? He did that? Oh, fuck that shit. Let's go and support the survivors.
Yeah.
But it's not easy being in the hip hop cultural world, especially the politics, where someone you would never think would be that person is that person.
Yeah, that's tough.
So what do we do, like in your own internal shit, but also like, how do we show up for those that he abused? I didn't know it. I just didn't know it.
You know, I work with a Pan-Africanist organization here in France called the Pan-African League of Mojab, and we started an event called Pan-Af Hip Hop, which is Pan-African Hip Hop. And so this past year, we did our first, you know, edition. We're going to go, you know, once every year. But this past year, we had a whole exhibition, you know, about hip hop. It was called Hip Hop, a revolutionary and Pan-Africanist culture, right? So we spoke about how hip hop started and the influences, you know, the political influences and all of that. And so there came a time where we had to speak about Bambaataa, right? So we
hard, dude.
Yeah. So we had to have a talk, like how we gonna do this, within the exhibition. So we chose to just, lay out the history and then, have it in then right under one of his photos that, this person has been charged with serious crimes and
That's funny that you say that because the hip hop museum that's being built in the Bronx, which many of us are women, are out that shit because of their bullshit around like embracing Bambaataa and also gentrifying the Bronx. It's just like it's not easy,
yeah.
but once you do the right thing. Like
Right.
my childhood was fucked up, but in one effort, it was like my mom and dad will also tell the truth, do the right thing. It's not easy for us who were on panels with him to think, what the F? But also, my experiences with sexual assault, everybody would be like, we didn't think that dude would be the one. I'm like, yeah, that's what it goes out. Like, we don't. And how does that happen? And what's the ripple effects for the many men in the culture that are not like him?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to hear
It's
all these
hard.
things and to see what's going on. We
But
think
also,
about the
like, let's
victims.
just think of this. Yeah, it's hard, but then Fernando would be like, you don't have to like spend your time hating the person that let you down. Just keep doing the work.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, without a doubt. I appreciate that. Let's get into 2008. He ran as VP on a ticket with Cynthia McKinney, right? With the Green Party, 2008. So listen, this is to me
How old were you then? Were you like
how old was that? 2008? Is that the year that's the year Obama won his first election?
no? When were you born?
I was born in 85.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No,
So
yeah.
I was
Okay.
in college. My politics weren't on point yet though. So but when I look at it, to me, that's the first all black ticket. That's what I see.
I mean, yes, like, it was crazy. It was 2008. At that point, like, I had got fired from my other job, and I was like, what the fuck am I gonna do when I got my husband, my sister, and luckily, my sister living in North Carolina, she's like, just come through and stay with us, and then I did, and then I got the call from Cynthia, and she's like, do you want to be my VP? I said, fuck it, I ain't making no money. Let's go. I like, let me at least travel.
Right.
Kind of thing, and it just happened in that way. It was not organic. It was just more like because I've already been a Green Party member, so I was seeing Dr. Jared Ball and then Cynthia like on debate. So because at that time, Jared Ball, which you should have an interview with him because he talks about the falsehoods of the Black spending power and Latino spending power. He would be amazing. And he has two daughters that are Afro Latina daughters because his wife's Panamanian. But all this shit went down. I was just like, this is crazy. And I said, fuck it, let's go. And I'm glad I did it. I went to states that I would never even think of going to. Cynthia's incredible. The run was incredible. The flip side of it is there's people to this day that I consider comrades that when this shit went down, they made fun of me. Like they called me to laugh at me as a joke. And I was like, dude, I'm like, this is not a joke. But once I got that reaction from my own people, I was like, fuck it, let's go. Fuck, like, F it.
Yeah,
like they don't like me, so I'm just gonna go. And also it was also before social media, which I'm always telling people, I'm like, oh my God, if I had social media at that time, I don't even know how I would navigate it because that's when social media kind of like started blowing up.
True.
But as I tell to everybody, look, that road to me being a vice president candidate where people could be literally like voting for me was part of the hip hop politics. With me being part of founding the hip hop political convention. But when you look at what we asked for and then the Green Party, I at least did two things that I love. I put in the policy, like Palestinian people must be free, and then cancel student debt. So in 2008, I was like, do this and this shit right now, kind of thing. Right now, we're in a period here in the United States. I think you might have a different perspective around you being in France, but here in the United States, what I've seen that I really love during this election is how many young people are like, I don't like any of the parties. So then I go on, I'm like, if you don't like any of them, hey, hit that up.
Third parties. Yeah, time to vote third party.
Well, the third parties exist, but what actually has been happening is that the third parties are being challenged by the Democrats, not the Republicans.
I know.
Because you got enough people running on third parties that will change the aspect of this election. But also, like, now that you're realizing that you want to come to us, we've been coming to y'all. People are done. They don't want to duopoly. They want to have many fucking different people who are like, I want to run for this kind of thing. So, look, I think we're in a moment in the world where everything that everybody thought was supposed to be is being ended. And I love that. Like, I embrace the chaos. I embrace the fact that I'm like, we should not be living like this. This is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
it is.
That's how I think about it.
So yeah, so speaking about third parties, we had Dr. Cornel West on, on the Rise Up before on our morning show right here on Black Power Media. We had him on, and
I love Dr. West this much that I was like, first of all, I was happy right now where we have in here in the United States, we have the Party for Socialism and Liberation.
Yeah.
Their presidential candidate is Claudia de la Cruz. I did an interview with her last week, and her running mate, Karina Garcia. And then you look at the Justice for All People's Party is obviously Dr. West, but después is Melina Abdullah as his vice presidential candidate. She's the one that brought me out to Cali, and she's one of my best friends. So
and I want to mention she's a Pan-Africanist.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. I went to, when she's the Pan-African Studies chair, she made the position for me to spend out a year in LA. And I'm telling you, to this day, it's one of the most greatest experiences because people that were in my classroom 7 years ago are just doing like incredible work. But I think it's important to at least recognize that at this moment, like third parties are being treated like they're the problem. When you run for any election, it's not a problem. It's more like, did you turn your base out? And for 99 problems, but it's also like a lot of Democratic Party officials sue to keep third parties off the ballot because they know it takes, siphons away their votes.
Well, that's what empire does. They find a bunch of things that are the problem, that are going to be the problem, but the empire is not the problem. Everything else is, we need to blame each other. We need to blame this. We need to blame that. But, to get back to Dr. Abdullah real quick, during the pandemic, I was in Cuba, right? And I actually followed one of her. She did a Pan-Africanist course at where she teaches it in college, right? But
Can't say the late. Yeah.
She broadcasted it live on Facebook, so I actually got to follow it during COVID. It was dope. And so when I saw that, Dr. West picked her as a running mate, I thought that was a dope pick. And I know that you have been actually, right, publicly, you're supporting them.
Absolutely.
Right? Dope. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about that and just, why you think that it's important for people to actually, instead of thinking of third parties as, the problem, to look towards, third parties.
I like that you said, instead of looking at third parties as a problem, I'm a third party person. I'm a registered green, but I also live in New York, and that gives me a lot of privilege, right? Like when I vote for Melina and Dr. West, my one vote is not going to change the strategy, right? I just don't think that so many people in electoral politics understands the system. I don't think that people understand that to be a third party, at the end of the day, you're going to need lawyers that are rejecting the Democrats. And then the flip side of it is like the Republicans that help us fight the Democratic, right? Like line because they're like, the more you motherfuckers don't vote for the Democrat, it's better for me. Like, I know that. But also, I'm like, we deserve so much better. Like, why is this happening? Like, why are we in a space where, like, this dude could become the president? The only thing I could do about that is continue to do my work and more be purposeful in being international and getting out the zeitgeist of the United States of America. Because my dissertation specifically is talking about hip hop generation folks within the United States of America for what is going on in the rest of the world. You know, the fact that I can eat every day is a privilege, and I take that very, very seriously. You know, and then probably you seeing in Cuba and me seeing in Puerto Rico what's going on around capitalism, the climate catastrophe. You know, so I would say this. I talk to anybody and I never listen to myself again because I'm always like, I think I'm doing the right thing, you know? And I got enough people around me that were like, yo. But I also think we're in a very dangerous moment in this country. And also in Europe in general. It's not like Germany or France are like escaping these right-wing nationalists. Now, for me, watching international news, seeing that what was about to go down in France, and then all the left was like, oh no, it's not about to happen in here, was a privilege. Because here in this country, we don't get those wins. They'll show this something that we weren't even thinking about.
Yeah. What you're speaking about is real. And, you know, shout out to, you know, Daruba bin Wahad, who has been speaking about a united front against fascism. You know, very much needed because we are seeing that rise in fascism, you know, across the world. We've definitely been seeing it here in France and in Europe in general, but definitely the United States as well and globally. So yeah, that's definitely something that's going on. But listen, I appreciate your time. This has been really great. It's been amazing. Before you go, I would, you know, we like to do book recommendations here at the Vada Hoops podcast. So if you have,
no, I got it. I was about to pull it, but I have it right now because I'm in the office.
Cool.
So my recommendation is called War Against Puerto Ricans, Revolution and Terror in America's Colonies. So it really like, it made me so understand like COINTELPRO, CIA, FBI, specifically about the attacks on Boricuas, Puerto Ricanos that were fighting for independence.
Right.
This is my favorite book.
Appreciate that. Thank you. That's a good one. Definitely gonna look that up. I'm gonna have that down in the description for everybody to go check it out. And I'm gonna recommend myself. I'm gonna recommend a book as well today. You know, this is Wisdom of the Cypher by the sister Toni Blackman.
Oh, Toni.
Yep.
Have you interviewed her?
I have. Yeah. Toni's definitely on the Vada Hoops podcast. She was here early, you know.
I got it.
Episode 2 for everybody. Go check out episode 2, early episode. Toni Blackman was on it. She's the dopest. She's, you know, the dopest. So check out that book too, Wisdom of the Cypher. Shout out to Toni Blackman. Please, Rosa, let us know let everybody know, you know, your socials, website. I'm gonna put all that down in the description, but let people know so they can follow you, see what you got going on, you know, support you and all of that.
Appreciate you. So my website is rosaclemente.net, not .com, .net. And then everything else on all social medias is Rosa Clemente. Although Instagram is Black Puerto Rican PhD. So yeah. And also, I want to interview you when I start my show next week. So, anytime. I mean, I want to know getting. No, I think these are important things. And, you know, I think it's really dope to find somebody that's like within like a Blackness tradition where we don't have to even question.
That's right.
We're part of the people and we're going to keep being good. And I'm glad to see you with Kalanji, who I've known for 25 years. It's like, it's fucking dope. And I love it. So thank you for having me on.
No, thank you. It's an honor. Shout out to Kalanji. Shout out to Black Power Media. And shout out to you. And please continue doing what you do. We appreciate you. We salute you. And hopefully we'll have you back on the platform soon.
Okay. Okay, peace. Thank you for the interview. I appreciate it.
Peace. Much respect.
All right.
Peace. All right. Shout out to Rosa Clemente. We give thanks for her presence. We give thanks for her work. Make sure you check her out on social media. Like I said, the info is down in the description. Also down below in the description is a couple of things we spoke about throughout the interview. We spoke about Habana Negra. For those of you who speak Spanish, check out the link of the interview with my brother Sekou of Anónimo Consejo. And episode 2 of the Vado Hoops podcast featuring Toni Blackman. Check that out as well. The link is down in the description. I appreciate you all for watching. Like I said, please like, share, subscribe. Like the comrade Kemba said, hit the bell, all right? And I'll see you tomorrow morning for the Rise Up morning show. The struggle continues. Vado Hoops is for the people, by the people, for the culture. Uhuru.